Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be taking you through the final steps and ultimately the maiden of the Boomin Flerken. Now this video is going to show you exactly how to install the electronics, how to program your transmitter, how to check the throws, the rates, and everything you need to do to have an ultimate great first flight. Now for this video, make sure you have your transmitter already bound to your receiver and make sure that both of them are 6-channel capable. Along with that, you're also going to need your battery to get the proper center of gravity, of course your hot glue gun, and maybe even a razor blade. Let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. All right friends, we are on to our final chapter with putting our electronics in before we ultimately can take this out and fly for the first time. Now in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to not only hook up the Flerken, but I'm also going to be walking you through the differential thrust programming for the Radio Master. Now by now, you should have both your motors hooked up. You should have the motors running in the right directions and marked left and right. And along with that, we're going to need a couple extra servo extensions to be able to reach where our receiver is going to be. Now all of this programming, along with a lot of other cool features, can also be put on the FT Aura 5. Now if you haven't already, make sure that your receiver is bound, make sure that you have a new fresh model programmed, and make sure that you also name that model so you can go back to it anytime. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make the main connection between our elevator servo and our servo extension. So here I have my servo lead for my elevator that's popping out the front, and I have one of my servo extensions. I'm going to make a loose knot here, and I'm going to line up my signal wire with my signal wire and my ground with my ground. The reason I want this to be knotted is because it's going to be incredibly difficult to access this later, so if it accidentally comes unplugged, you're going to have to cut into your airplane to be able to get access to it. So now that we have that, I'm just going to go ahead and find the lead that is tied to it, and that's this one right here. And I'm going to just gently give gentle pressure on it as I push it back with my finger. Now I can take the remaining lead and I can hook this up to my right ESC. Again, I'm just going to knot this together, making sure my signal wires line up with my signal wires and my ground lines up with my ground. A little bit of gentle tension and I'll be able to tuck this in. And then finally, I'm going to take my power lead, I'm going to plug it in. For right now, I'm going to leave everything separate until we make sure that all the controls work the way we want it, and then we're going to glue that in as one of the very last steps. Let's go ahead and do the same process now on the other side with the left motor. Our left side only has one servo connection, so we just got to knot that, line up our signal with our signal and our ground with our ground, press it into place. And then we can just gently tuck it back, just like that. And then we'll plug in our power. We're going to take our servo Y harness and we're going to use this for our ailerons. Now with the stock Flerken, we had elevons, and the elevons required each channel to be separately connected to our receiver or the FT Aura 5. For this application, we can actually servo Y this together, but if you do want to be able to plug them in separately for any kind of specific adjustment, all you need to do is run 2 separate servo extensions. I'm going to guide this through the rear hole here and pull this up through. One nice thing about the Flerken is it has plenty of room and real estate for electronics and wiring. I'm going to pull this out the other side, and then here's my other aileron connection. Always double and triple check to make sure that your connections always line up with your signal wire and with your ground wire. If one of these is plugged in backwards, you'll oftentimes find that that specific control surface will not work. Now I already have my Radio Master receiver bound, and the channel mapping on this goes aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder. So because this is the aileron, I'm going to go ahead and line this up, and if you notice on the side here, you're going to see S, plus, and minus. S stands for signal. Now in other receivers, you may see a little horseshoe marking, and that horseshoe marking means the exact same thing, signal. So I'm going to take my white wire, I'm going to press that into place. And I like to kind of keep my wires routed nice and clean, so I'm just going to wire it through the rear area here and pull that through, and I'll make my connection. You are welcome to tape your connections, but because these are so easily accessible and they're really not under any tension, I'm not too worried about these like I was with the pieces that were in the boom. Now this is my left throttle, and for my left throttle, I'm going to plug that into servo port number 3. Same process on the other side. I'm going to take my servo extension and I'm going to look for whichever wire goes to my ESC. And you can see it's this one right here. So I'm going to plug that in, signal to signal. Bring it around. And for this, I'm going to be assigning port number 5 as my other throttle port. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up with port number 5, making sure my signal wire is pointing towards the top, and I'm going to plug that in. And then finally, I'm going to take my elevator servo. I'm going to match my servo extensions up with each other. I'm going to plug this in, bring it back through the back. And line this up with my elevator. My elevator is going to be channel number 2. So I'm going to line this up with channel number 2 and then plug it in. So again, for a recap, because of the throttle mapping being a little bit different than Spectrum, we have aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder, and then channel number 5 is going to be programmed to be throttle as well for a differential thrust. If you're programming this with a Spectrum radio or any other radio that has a different channel mapping, simply make sure that you plug the proper control into the proper channel. Now before we power this on, we do want to make sure that we have our channels programmed into our transmitter, and I'm going to take you through that process right now. So as I mentioned before in the video, we already have a new model selected on our radio master. We already have our receiver bound, and at this point, we're going to be going through and showing you how to do differential thrust. Differential thrust basically gives you the ability to have one motor produce more or less power than the other, and that gives you the same effect as yaw control. Now, differential thrust is not only fantastic for doing things like taking off and landing, but it's also really fun for aerobatics like flat spins. Because this aircraft does not have a standalone rudder, differential thrust is going to be the only way that you're going to get your rudder control. Now, if you have a more simple radio or you don't want to program differential thrust, you don't have to worry about that, but just keep in mind that you will not be able to steer your airplane easily on the ground, and it's going to limit some of your aerobatic capabilities. Now, as you can see here, I have the Boomin Flerken already programmed in. I got a brand new model. Now we can go ahead and start programming our differential thrust. The way we're going to start this is we're going to hold down on model. And once we've entered the screen, you'll see on the side here, we have return, page forward, page backwards, and telemetry. We're going to press the page forward button until we come up to mixes. Now, as I mentioned before, we want 2 different channels operating on the throttle channel. All I need to do is scroll down to channel number 5, press the button, and right where it says switch number 1, I'm going to highlight and press that, and I'm going to move my throttle. At this point, you can see that my throttle channel moves together, and if I backed all the way out of this and went to monitor, you'll see that both channel 3 and 5 are tied together. Now that we have both of these throttle channels tied together, I'm going to go back into model, I'm going to go back over to mixes, and I'm going to scroll down to the throttle port. I'm going to press down on my rolly ball, I'm going to do a long press on my rolly ball, and I'm going to hit insert after. I'm going to scroll down to throttle, press it, and I'm going to move my rudder over. For the weight on this, I want to do this at -100. There we go. If I scroll down just a little bit more, I'm going to come up to what's curve. I'm going to press down on curve, and I'm going to roll this until I see expo. Now, expo is very useful, especially with something like differential thrust, because we don't want the motors to be so sensitive, especially with small movements, that they cause the plane to fly jerky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial this up to 50% expo, simply by scrolling over, clicking again, and then rolling that to 50. Keep in mind, if you go -50, that's going to make it more sensitive towards the center, where +50 will make it more relaxed during the center. Finally, I'm going to scroll down one more time to where it says switch, and I'm going to select this back switch here. I want this switch to be activated when I flip it forward and disactivated when it's flipped backwards. So default will be no differential thrust. When I flip it forward, differential thrust will be activated. We can also assign voice commands to be able to let you know that you've switched on to differential thrust. At this point, feel free to pause the video, make sure that your settings look just like what you see here. We're going to do the exact same process now on channel number 5, which is also now labeled throttle. We're going to hold down on this, we're going to go down to insert after, and now once we've gone to insert after, we can go to our source, we're going to move our rudder. This is already locked in at 100%, which is great. We do want to go down and we want to soften that up a little bit, so we'll highlight where differential is. We'll roll it over to Expo, click it, then move over and click on 0% and roll that to 50. And to be able to turn this on and off, we're going to highlight our switch. We're going to flip this forward, we'll lock it in, and then we'll confirm as when the switch is flipped forward, it's activated. When it's flipped backwards, it's not. So you can see here we have throttle with the switch flipped backwards, but we have no differential control. When we flip that switch forward, our differential and our throttle work together. Let's go ahead and return out of this, and we'll look at our channel mapping and make sure we're happy with everything. So here on channel number 3 and 5, you can see that they're working together, and with differential activated, you can see that our channel 3 and 5 are working opposed from each other. So in other words, when I go to the left, my right motor is going to spin up higher, my left motor is going to spin down, and when I go up to the right, it's going to be the opposite. Now when we go to test this, if your motors are accidentally backwards, in other words, maybe you have your left motor plugged into the wrong port and it's backwards, you can do two things. You can either switch your weights, or you can just simply swap the two throttle channels. Now we have our differential programming all fixed into our radio. Our next step is we're going to power this on and we're going to make sure that everything works properly. It's always important to never put your propellers on your motors until you're ready for its first maiden flight. That way if anything goes wrong or you're making switches and it goes live, you're not going to hurt yourself or anything around you. So my throttle's down closed, differential is off. We'll wait for the beeps. And my two throttles are working as well too. Let's just check to make sure that the directions of our motors are moving the proper way. If they aren't, all we need to do is simply switch the two connections. So I'm going to go ahead and activate my differential thrust. I'm going to go ahead and go to the left, and theoretically our right motor will spool up and our left one does. Now because our differential thrust is backwards, we have two options. We can change the weights here from positive 100 to negative 100 and vice versa, or we can simply go to our two throttle channels, which is in this case channel number 3 and channel number 5, and switch them. That's what I'm going to do here, and then we're going to go ahead and do an ESC calibration afterwards. So it's channel number 3 and 5. I'm going to move 3 to 5 and 5 to 3. There we go, we have those two switched up. We're going to go ahead and do an ESC calibration now, and to do an ESC calibration, it's very easy. All we simply need to do is make sure our props are off, number 1. Number 2, our transmitter is powered on and throttles all the way up. And then finally, we're going to power this on. We're going to listen for some unique beeps from the ESC. Then we'll move our throttle all the way down. All right, let's see how our ESCs are now. And that's perfect. Finally, we're gonna check for differential. We're gonna go to the left, and our right motor spools up, and when we go to the right, our left motor spools up. Everything is hooked up. We can now make any kind of adjustments we need to do with our linkages and stuff to get everything neutral. Now that our motors are spinning the proper direction and we have our differential thrust all programmed in and we've confirmed everything is working, our next step is to mount these into the booms for one last time. Now for this application, we're going to actually disconnect one at a time and replug these in, going through this hole right here on the bottom. This is going to give us the ability to be able to route the ESCs and everything down through it. But the way I'm going to route these wires in, I'm going to keep the ESC above the power pod. That way it gets plenty of airflow and stays nice and cool. So let's just go ahead and we'll just go one at a time here. Pass this on through. Just to make sure that we're not going to have any contact issues with the center body, I'm going to go ahead and temporarily just push this into its spot here. We'll go back a little bit further than what you see here, but I'm going to mount my nose and I'm going to mount my propeller and make sure that it doesn't make contact. One nice thing about this is we have about an 1/8 inch gap that we can move in one direction or the other. So even if you're a little bit closer to comfort, you can slide it over. And from that point on, we're going to cut the reliefs in both sides of our wings to be able to slide it the rest of the way back. Make sure you have at least a 1/4 inch of gap between the prop and the front of the nose, because when you slide it back, it's going to close that gap just a little bit more. A great reference point for me is I like to keep this side perfectly flush and let the outside kind of overlap it just a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my pod and I'm gonna slide this back right where it meets the leading edge, keeping this inside part of my power pod flush. Once I have my power pod flush, I'm gonna take my razor blade and I'm gonna do a cut mark on the outside and the inside of my power pod on both sides. On the very front here, we have about 1/4 inch overlap. I'm gonna cut back 1/4 of an inch on this side, and because this side's already 1/8 inch out, I'm only gonna cut out about 1/8 of an inch. But the end goal is to move this back to where the very front of your firewall and your power pod is flush with your boom. And with a simple rocking motion, you can cut down through both layers. And pop out the excess. Let's go ahead and do a quick test fit here. And with a little bit of rocking motion, this will slide all the way back and be nice and flush. Again, we're making sure that our prop's clear. You can see we have at least an 1/8 inch gap. That's perfect. Now that we practiced putting on our power pod into our booms, let's go ahead and put our glue down and we'll do this one last time. It's incredibly important to make sure that the power pod is sitting flush on top of the boom, because if it has any angle, positive or negative, it's gonna cause the plane to roll when you change your power settings. All right, so we'll put a nice healthy bead of glue right there on the top of our boom. I like to press a little bit of glue on each slot. And then finally, we'll put a big old glob of glue right there on the back. I'm gonna tilt this in, all the way back against the slots, and then we'll press it down flat. Oops, I actually got one servo wire right in there. Definitely don't want that. There we go. Again, you have plenty of time to work with the glue. Don't get anxious. Make sure it's nice and flush right up against the side of the boom. That's gonna make sure that our motors are direct, and it's also sitting flat on top of it. Again, we're making sure that we're taking our time, making sure the power pod is flush on top of the boom, and also the side surface is flush with the side of the boom. This is gonna make sure that our angle of attack is perfect, and we're gonna hold it down until it fully dries. Now that our pod is glued down, we can carefully guide in all of our wires, and this makes it exceptionally easy to be able to service this in the future. Say you have to change out your ESC or something, you can carefully pull this up and be able to service it or swap it out, and then press it back in. If you want, you can use a little drop of hot glue or even a zip tie to go right through the hole here and hold down your ESC right in the path of wind. This is gonna keep it nice and cool so you have plenty of power with no extra heat. Now that we have our left side done, I'm gonna remove my prop, put my prop nut back on, and repeat the exact same process on the other side. And just like the other side, we're gonna pass our leads through one at a time, plugging them back in, going through our power pod. Next, we'll guide all of our wires up through. Next, we'll do a quick test fit here and install a prop temporarily so we can make sure that we have plenty of clearance between the nose and the prop. Got at least 1/4 inch, that's perfect. So that means on both sides of this here, I'm gonna cut back on the inside and the outside and go back the same distance as our piece is hanging out. On the inside, it'll be roughly 1/4 inch, and on the outside, it'll be roughly 1/8 of an inch. Simple rocking motion is all you need to be able to cut down through both surfaces of foam, and you can use a screwdriver to pluck out the excess foam once you've cut it. Let's go ahead and do one last test fit here, and we're gonna rock up the power pod right into the boom, and we're gonna press back firmly all the way and make sure it sits flat on the power pod. Just one final check on the prop, make sure we have plenty of clearance, and we do. Now we can rock our power pod up, place a nice healthy bead of glue right along our foam boom, a little bit in our notches. And I like to put a big old dollop right on the top of this plate here. Little rocking motion, getting it all the way back. Make sure you don't have any wires pinched between the power pod and the boom. Hold the power pod down until it's fully dry, and then we can reinstall our guide wires and dress up the ESC. And just like the other side, we can use a drop of hot glue or even a zip tie to be able to fasten our ESC so it gets plenty of airflow and sits out in the open. Both of our power pods are now installed, our motors are installed. We're ready to put our attention now towards the rear part of our stabilizer and install our control horn. So this control horn is the last wooden piece that we're going to have in our kit. We're going to go ahead and do a quick test fit now, but if you went ahead and followed along with me and bent everything appropriately, this should line up perfectly where the hole is directly below the hinge line. So let's go ahead and do a quick test fit. We're going to go to the outermost hole. A little bit of rotation is all we need. Now we can use a straight edge, a triangle, or even our foam spacer to make sure that this is completely flush and has no incidents up or down. At this point, all of our controls are moving, but we want to make sure that they're moving in the right direction and also that we have the right throws. As you guys may have seen in the early release video, as I was going through the design process, there was a test flight that we had that the plane just simply did not fly very good. We didn't know if this was aerodynamics or what it was, but we later on found out it was simply because we had way too much throw on this. So what we did is we included a throw gauge to give you the ultimate first setup. If you follow this throw gauge and you set up your settings there, you can then later adjust it to give yourself more or less throw based on your style of flying. Now the reason I'm telling you this story is because a lot of times people think that more throw means more control, and that simply isn't the case. For that reason, to make sure you have the best optimum first setup, I give you a little tiny throw gauge. We're going to go ahead and go to each of our controls and we're going to dial it in. I'm going to dial this into the H, which means high rates. Now later on, as you come back, you can adjust this higher and lower based on your flying experience and the flying style that you want. This does have the ability to do incredible high alpha and roll like a bullet. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go through each control and we're going to make sure they're going the proper direction. When I pull back on my elevator stick, the elevator should raise up. So right there I know that my elevator is backwards. I need to change that. Let's go ahead and take a look at our ailerons. Our ailerons are also backwards. So let's go ahead and change that by going and pressing model. We're going to page over all the way until we see outputs. Here you can see channel 1 is aileron, channel 2 is elevator. If I click on the rolling ball one time, I can then scroll over and you'll see at this point, right here, it says direction. All I need to do to change that direction is click one time. When I click that one time, if you had any subtrims dialed in, you're going to notice that the subtrims may need to be reversed to the opposite side. So I can go ahead and do that right now. You can see it says subtrim here. I'll click once. And we'll dial that back to neutral. Now that I have my controls going the right way, I'm going to place my gauge right on the top with the hinge line being at the point where the angle changes. You can see that when I pull this up, it meets it up pretty much flush, and that's exactly what we want for high rates. Again, the ailerons can be a little bit higher rates, but I still want to get that down. As we pull that over, you can see that's perfect right there. All right. Once we have our rates and directions locked in, I'm going to dial in 30% expo on both the elevator and the ailerons. If you guys remember earlier, we already dialed in the expo that we need for our differential thrust. So let's do one final check here. Push the ailerons to right, I go right, the throws are perfect, left, left, pull back on the stick, the elevator rises, and again the throws are perfect. I got my throttle, and then finally, I have my differential thrust. When I push to the left, my right motor spins up, and when I push to the right, my left motor spins up. Everything's all set, we have our controls. Let's go ahead and establish the proper center of gravity, and then we're ready to take it out for a maiden. So now that we have our control surfaces figured out, we have our expos dialed in, we tested our differential, motors are spinning in the proper direction, we're in our final steps to prepare this, and that's where we're going to be mounting our electronics on the top and also our battery. Now, the battery and also the FPV gear are going to be what decide where our center of gravity is. We also have this receiver here that we want to get out of the way, and we don't want it flopping around, and we want to make sure that the antennas are arranged in a way to give us the best reception and reliability possible. Easiest thing to do is take some of our included extra Velcro, cut an extra inch apart, and we're going to stick down the receiver in the rear part of our Flerken. All right, I'm just going to slide this back here, just like that. And to make things easy, I'm just going to take my little screwdriver here. I'm going to poke one hole going straight down. Now I'm at my one receiver wire going down through that hole. Then my other receiver wire, we're going to go 90 degrees horizontal. Now you're going to see two holes on the bottom of the Flerken. Those two holes are actually for the stock Flerken. The area that we're gonna wanna look at is gonna be about a 1/2 inch ahead of the seam that you see right here. As you can see, when I balance it, we always want to have just a little bit of nose down tendency. That way we definitely know that we're a little bit nose heavy, not tail heavy. Now, if you are gonna be putting on the optional landing gear, we will see you in the next video. That's where we're gonna be putting this on and ultimately take it for its maiden. If you're not planning on putting on the optional landing gear, we'll see you out in the flying field. All right, guys, we are ready to take this up for its final flight. As you can see, I put some awesome new FT fatigues on it. These decals work fantastic both on the Flerken, but also on any other FT plane that you wanna put them on. We have a really cool video out here called 6 Quick Tips for a Successful First Flight. It goes over balance, control throws, everything we covered inside. Make sure you go through that, make sure your balance is correct, make sure you're taking off into the wind. We're ready to take this up and fly it. All right, my battery's in, I got my differential thrust on, right, left, up, down, life is good. Let's go ahead and smoothly apply power. What we're gonna do for takeoff is we're gonna smoothly apply power. The nice thing is with the Y landing gear, it's gonna track straight as an arrow. We can make small corrections if we have to, and it's naturally gonna lift off pretty much on its own with maybe just a breath of back pressure. Let's take it up and fly it. There it is. I actually did not put any input and it just flew right off the ground. That positive incidence is exactly what we need. Now you can definitely dial this into your taste here. This plane is really designed to be an awesome, smooth flying aircraft, but it's also capable of high alpha, which means you may want to increase those elevator inputs later on. We're gonna do a nice gentle flyby here. All right, I'm gonna take this up here. I wanna show you what this can do with speed. When we went ahead and removed those pontoons from there, we gained about 30% speed, which is fantastic. And you can really feel that on the cross, and especially when you go vertical. And we'll just go ahead and kick it right into a flat spin. Anytime that you want to exit your flat spin, all you need to do is just center your throttle. Let's go ahead and try our slow flight here. One of the cool things about this model is although it's capable of high speed, it's also capable of very slow speed. Now this is something you want to practice while you're up high, but you can see as I pull back on the elevator and kind of transition to high alpha, this is incredibly docile and still very maneuverable. I'm just kicking around really hard, abusing it. As you get more and more comfortable with this, you can actually bring this closer and closer to the ground and walk it around like a dog. So let's go ahead and just practice landing right now. I'm gonna let the plane naturally descend, not chopping the throttle, just about 1/3 to 1/4 throttle. Now I'm all the way back, a little bit of flare, right on the mains. And that differential's awesome. Friends, I want to sincerely thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. Thank you for taking the time to build with me. Now, we are not done with this Flerken. As we mentioned earlier, we are going to be bringing those pontoons back later on in the fall. If you built along with me, even with that optional landing gear, don't worry. You're going to be able to put that all-terrain add-on later. That landing gear is going to help you mount it. Now, if you're just following along with this video here to see if this plane is right for you, I hope this answered your questions. I think this should be one in every hangar. Thanks so much for being part of the family. I'll see you next time.